Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point on AFR Talk. This is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, your congenial, convivial, and amiable host. Welcome aboard the USS Focal Point. It is our patrol boat in which we patrol the choppy waters of America's public life, looking for the coordinates where truth intersects with politics, where truth intersects with public policy. And here to help us do a little bit of that is a good friend of this program, Dr. Scott Lively, with Defend the Family International. Scott is the author of the book, The Pink Swastika, which I referred to on a number of occasions, about the role of homosexuality in the formation of the Nazi Party. Scott, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be on the program again.
Good to be with you. And Scott, first of all, before we jump into the topic of scouting, and I'm going to have David Smith from the Illinois Family Institute on at the bottom of the hour. What was your reaction to the defeat of sodomy-based marriage in Illinois?
Well, I was surprised. We got a win.
It
hasn't happened very often these days.
Well, and it seems to me that maybe one of the lessons, and I'll talk with David about this a little more detail, but one of the lessons, it seems to me, from that is, all we hear about is how it's inevitable, it's inexorable, this momentum toward gay marriage can't be stopped, there's nothing you can do about it, you just got to roll over and take it, no point in even fighting it any longer. And yet, in a very blue state, the natural marriage position won.
Amen, and it just shows the power, the real power of grassroots. So I think that's how this was done, and very commendable campaign by the Illinois pro-family leaders. They just did a fantastic job, and it's encouraging to everyone around the nation.
Now, Scott, you wrote a column. This is what I want to talk with you about. By the way, the New York Times had a piece this morning. I don't know if you saw it. Maybe this was yesterday. About how many people are fleeing the Boy Scouts now. They're just leaving in droves over this change in policy.
Yeah,
and
of course.
You had a column, Scott, entitled "Satan Wins Back the Scouts." So the idea, if he's winning the Scouts back, then there was a time when Satan was kind of in charge of the scouting movement. That was taken away from him, and now he's retrieved control of the scouting movement. So walk us through what you're talking about there.
Well, some people, when you start talking about the homosexual roots of the scouting movement, they will assume you're talking about Lord Baden-Powell. The homosexuals claim that he was one of them, and that that scouting is rooted in that. But I'm not talking about that. Baden-Powell was not a homosexual, as far as I can tell. The evidence that they offer for it very scanty, and his life just does not seem to reflect that problem. I'm talking about the deeper roots of the scouting movement, which go back, as many evil things do, back to German culture in the decades leading up to the Nazi Party, and specifically the real founding of the worldwide scouting movement started in 1890 in Germany, and it was very quickly taken over by a group of pederasts, and they shaped the organization according to their own goals, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what those.
By pederast, so people know what we're talking about. That's just a dictionary term for adults who have sex with adult males who have sex with male boys. That's a pederast.
Yeah, and understand this. This is a word that's disappeared from our vocabulary, and I think by design, because pederasty is actually the most common form of homosexuality in history. It's adult male relationships with boys. Now, not little boys, but although it can reach like down 7 or 8 years old, but it's really focused on the turning point of puberty, and 12, 13 years old. This is the core of male homosexual culture. Always has been, and it's also the foundation of the warrior cult societies through history, of men who bond together in groups, all male culture, and with a special emphasis on boys just becoming men. And that's what pederasty is. Jerry Sandusky was a pederast. The Catholic priests, who all these guys who were involved in the scandals, was not pedophilia. Pedophilia is sort of a generic, broad term that sort of implies that it's a different, a separate kind of sexual perversion. Pederasty is what we're talking about, and it's a form of homosexuality, and that's where the real roots of the Scouting movement go.
And this actually goes back, as you've written about, to the Greek ideal about the warriors who would bond together as pairs and then go to war together. The movie 300 is sort of rooted in that tradition.
Yeah, and they sanitized, the movie 300 they didn't acknowledge the homosexual aspect of it. But that's who those guys were. And it was the Spartans that really exemplified this. The Spartan society was divided up and in the three levels that Plato actually talked about. The foundation of fascism, really. Plato invented it in his book called The Republic. And it's the sort of philosopher kings at the top, the elite, and then the military caste, and then the peasants beneath that. And the military caste in Sparta, they had mandatory induction of boys into the military from age of 8 to 12, and they were given to homosexual soldiers in the military to be trained in military arts and homosexuality. And they developed in this all-male culture, as has happened frequently in history, this sort of warrior ethos, focused on honor and bravery and courage, positive values, but built around a core of homosexual perversion. And that's what the Spartans did, and the Nazis actually copied that. In fact, the Nazi Party was an outgrowth of the masculine faction of the German gay subculture that was reacting against the effeminate branch, which sprang up before it, and they reached back to Sparta as a model for themselves and as a counter to the idea that homosexuals are really women trapped inside men's bodies. But
anyway, the scouting movement began, the modern scouting movement began in Germany in 1890. It was called the German Youth Movement, or the Wandervogel, which means wandering birds or wandering youth. So these were adults that would take these boys on hiking trips and campouts and all that kind of thing. But it was really a sort of a homosexual recruitment tool to sort of recreate the Greek ideal of man-boy love. So, and then when Baden-Powell started the Boy Scouts, he rooted his in Christian principles, so it was different. And that's the thing you're lamenting here. What Baden-Powell did was start something different and in contrast to this homosexual recruitment style. But now it looks like Satan has taken back control of this thing. And I want to ask you when we close to kind of talk about what you see coming ahead for the Boy Scouts, but briefly talk about the connection between this wandering youth, the scouting movement, this homosexual-oriented scouting movement in Germany, and how that is connected to the development and growth of the Nazi Party.
Well, there were two men and a youth who took control of this sort of fledgling hiking and camping group, and Carl Fischer was the primary guy. He was actually a teacher, and he called himself Der Führer. That was, and a lot of these symbols and terms that later associated with the Nazis actually came out of the Wandervogel.
In fact, the Heil salute came out of the Wandervogel, didn't it?
That's right. That's how they greeted each other with the Heil salute, and this is where the roots are. These guys, these pederasts with a masculine orientation, they wanted to create the all-male society, the Männerbund. This is a picture of the Nazis later, and they laid the groundwork for the whole thing. In fact, these boys who fell under the influence of these radical, militaristic pederasts were really shaped to become the perfect soldiers, which they were. These were the guys that launched the stormtroopers. That's who the stormtroopers were. Was boys that had been sort of trained in this Männerbund ideal, and they became the soldiers that were the bravest on the battlefield, and then they adopted that name stormtrooper, because they would get up, jump up out of the trench and run across the battlefield and dive into the other trench of the enemy and fight and kill them all. And they called them stormtroopers.
Now, Scott, we're running short on time, and I want to jump ahead from what we can learn from Nazi Germany, the rooting of the Nazi movement actually in the Scouting movement, which had a homosexual base. What do you see coming ahead now for the Boy Scouts? How concerned should we be as Americans about the direction the Boy Scouts now are going to move now that they have completely capitulated to the homosexual movement?
Well, it's going to. Frankly, I think that that the corporate money is now going to flow to these reprobates that have given up the ship under pressure. These fat cats that they wanted corporate money more than they wanted values. And I think there's going to be a lot of money pouring in. They're going to be able to maintain this organization, but the whole character is going to change. It's going to shrink, but it's going to start also to be used as a vehicle for sensitivity training, all the same nonsense that happens throughout the culture. And one more point, I think it's very important for people to acknowledge that the Boy Scouts really represent the last secular resistance to homosexuality in our culture. It's not a Christian organization, even though it has Christian values. It's a secular, association, and it's the last one. The military was the next to the last. The military has caved. It's now being transformed, and the Boy Scouts, the same thing is going to happen. And the only thing left now is the church. And what you're going to see over the next year is a blitzkrieg against the church like we've never seen before, because everything else has fallen, and it's only the church that's still standing in their way.
Our guest has been Dr. Scott Lively, author of the book The Pink Swastika, and alarming kind of connections or parallels between what happened in Germany leading up to Nazi Germany and what we're seeing now happening with the modern scouting movement in America. Well, Scott, thank you very much for taking time to be with us. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Brian. God bless you and your audience. Bye now.
Dr. Scott Lively, so Scott Lively, his assessment, look, everything has fallen except the church. The last holdout is the church. He sees a blitzkrieg coming from the homosexual movement targeted against the church. Let's stand tall and stand firm. Focal Point AFR Talk.